The Great Dance by Baxter, Kruger. Chapter 1. Piercing the Veil, the Trinity, and the Logic of the Universe. Piercing the Veil, the Trinity, and the Logic of the Universe. The whole dance, or drama, or pattern of this three-personal life is to be played out in each one of us. C.S. Lewis. One of the great moments of the last century happened when a young boy named C.S. Lewis stood beside a flowing currant bush outside his home in Ireland. As he stood there, Lewis tells us, his mind drifted back a few years to another morning when his brother, Warren, showed him his toy garden. When Warren's play garden was not much more than a biscuit tin filled with leaves and sticks and moss, nothing extraordinary. And remembering it, while standing by that bush, was nothing extraordinary. But somehow, in the mix of the moment, something extraordinary did happen. A feeling that Lewis had never known swept through his heart. It was a sensation of the profoundest sort, more of an encounter, and it left him breathless and longing. Through a memory of an ordinary moment of childhood play, Lewis encountered something that was larger than life, something greater and more beautiful than anything he had ever known. He had no idea what it was, or where it came from, or why it happened, but he knew that it was the best of all things, and he knew that whatever it was, he wanted to drink his fill of it. At key moments in his early life, Lewis had similar experiences. They were always powerful, but fleeting, and they always stirred an inconsolable longing in the marrow of his soul. Lewis was being wooed by what he eventually came to call joy. It haunted him, and like Solomon, he turned over every leaf in his universe to find it. As the years rolled by, his quest for joy became the only quest that mattered. In his search, Lewis finally stumbled into God and was summarily shocked to discover that joy and God were connected. He says that he had never had so much as a hint that there was a relationship between God and joy. It had never occurred to him. Joy, for Lewis, is not to be equated with happiness. The difference between the two is akin to that between a 5-course meal at a great French restaurant and a piece of chocolate. But having said this, the delight of a great meal doesn't last long either, and joy is about both delight and its ever-presence. And perhaps even more important, joy is about that delight and ever-presence filling our lives in all things. What Lewis was after was not a moment or two of a good feeling. He was after a total baptism in beauty and glory and delight, a baptism that would flow over into every nook and cranny of his humanity. What fascinates me about Lewis is his shock at discovering that joy and God go together. Lewis grew up in the Christian West, in Ireland and England. He grew up in the church, at least until he was old enough to make his own decisions. How can it be that it never crossed his mind that joy might be related to God? What has the Western world been told about God, such that a man so steeped in its Christian tradition, a man with such intelligence and breadth of reading, a man with the best education that the world has to offer, could be astonished to discover that his quest for life was answered in God? The Western world has come a long way since the days of Martin Luther and the Great Reformation. With Luther, we have a man utterly riddled with guilt and fear, a man desperately searching for forgiveness to the point of crawling up steps on his hands and knees in his quest for a gracious God. With Lewis, we have a man searching for life, not forgiveness. The two are related, of course, but they are distinct. And the difference between searching for forgiveness and the quest for life in all its fullness is the difference between 1500 and 2000 AD. But that is only one difference. Luther knew that the answer was in God. That fact never crossed Lewis's mind. Lewis's shock at discovering that the life he searched for was connected with God speaks volumes to us, not about Lewis or God per se, but about the way God has come to be perceived in the Western world. Lewis's quest and his surprise allow us to peer inside the corporate soul of the Western world. For Lewis is not a stranger to us. His journey is not foreign. The same longing for joy that haunted him haunts us, and the same veil that blinded him blinds us. Lewis's surprise is telling us that something has gone horribly wrong, and that there has been a fundamental breakdown in our thinking about God. Somewhere along the way, we have gotten the God thing seriously confused, and that confusion has left us in a very strange predicament. We are in the hunt for life, to be sure, for wholeness and meaning and joy, and we are driven with the same passion as Luther and Lewis, but we are knocking on the wrong doors. Without God, we will never find our resolution, and thus the life for which we are searching. But the way he has been portrayed in the Western world keeps us from even suspecting that God might be the answer to the passion of our hearts. The quest for life drives us, but we are doomed never to find the answer, and thus doomed to live with a gnawing sense of loss, with anxiety and franticness and quiet desperation, doomed to live in boredom with being alive. For like the early Lewis, we have dismissed the God thing as being irrelevant to our longing for life. After all, what has religion to do with life? This book grows out of my own quest for life and out of my journey through the confusion back to the real God, and thus out of wrestling with what has happened to our thinking and how we have gotten so far off track. My aim here is not argument. My aim is to pierce the veil. My aim is to pierce the veil so that we can see the sheer beauty of God, and in such light see what this God has planned for us and accomplished in Jesus Christ. All of this is in the hope that we might see ourselves in an astonishing light, that we may discover our true identity, who we really are, and thus understand what is happening in our lives and how to move forward toward joy. The riddle of my life. I did not have a powerful revelation of joy as Lewis did. As far as I can remember, there were no special encounters or extraordinary moments of insight in my early childhood. For me, there was simply an abiding and indisputable awareness that something vast and deep and ancient and beautiful is moving through the scenes of human life. For me, it was a given that human beings are a part of something magnificent, that there is an invisible river of sorts running through our lives, that we are part of a great dance. I do not know how I came by this knowledge. It was always just there. It never occurred to me to question it. To do so would have been a violation of something more real to me than my own existence. It was also a given that, whatever this river was, this great dance, the passion of my heart was to be in the middle of it. It is hard to imagine a person on the planet who does not want the same thing. In one way or another, aren't we all after the great dance? Is that not the story of our lives? Our deepest longing? To my mind, the central passion of the human heart is to be filled with the great dance, and the chief and maddening riddle of human life is to understand what the great dance is and how to live in it. The other part of the equation of my journey is that I grew up in the church. And when I say in the church, I mean it. If the doors of the church were opened, my family was there. We were always there. Sunday morning, Sunday night, youth group, Wednesday night prayer meeting. We even went to church when we were on vacation. I think I ended up with something like a 13-year perfect attendance Sunday school pin. To tell you the truth, I really didn't mind all that church. Most young people innately find church boring. But for me, while the service was certainly sterile, the Sunday school classes were stimulated, especially Guy McGee's, which was always filled with history. And the sermons, too, were almost always engaging. The long and short of it is that the Presbyterian church of my youth gave me a definite and lasting gift for which I will always be grateful. It taught me that what I was after was directly related to God. That fact is beautifully enshrined in the first question and answer of the shorter catechism. What is the chief end of man? Man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. So, unlike Lewis, I knew that what I was searching for was related to God. I knew that the invisible river moving through life, the great dance, was a divine reality. My problem was that I could never connect the dots. I could never see how they were related. While the church gave me a head start, it also created a problem that complicated the riddle. The problem was not so much the church itself, and certainly not the people, as it was the theology it handed on, and specifically its basic vision of God. Here's the definition of God set forward in the larger catechism. What is God? Question 7. What is God? A. Answer. God is a spirit, in and of himself, infinite in being, glory, blessedness, and perfection, all sufficient, eternal, unchangeable, incomprehensible, everywhere present, almighty, knowing all things, most wise, most holy, most just, most merciful and gracious, long-suffering, and abundant in goodness and truth. It is this God, this severely abstract divinity, that created the dilemma for me. On the one side, I knew about the river, the joy, the great dance. On the other side, I knew that it was related to God. But the bewildering question was, how could this be? How could this abstract divinity, this infinite, distant, austere omni-being, be connected to the great dance in any way at all? This God was certainly in control, absolutely so, down to the last molecule. But this God had no face, no real personality, no life. How could glorifying God be related to the enjoyment of anything? That was the riddle of my youth and my life. 2 other facts deepen the riddle. The first was the nature of Sunday morning worship. I always assumed that the threshold of the church was charged with some kind of mystical power of transformation. For everyone who crossed it decisively changed. Our personalities were altered. Outside, there were smiles and laughter and humanity. But once we crossed the threshold, every one of us went on to religious autopilot. It was very noticeable, even to a young boy. The threshold could silence the most boisterous of us, and I suppose even wipe the smile off a possum. The second factor came from the highly committed religious types. Naturally, I assumed that these types walked more closely with God than the rest of us. They certainly appeared to do so. As far as I could tell, they were good people and honorable, but they were about as interesting as a fence post. The highly committed religious types always struck me as being a shade or two on the nerdy side and heavy into religion because they could not do anything else. And the force of the threshold was obviously with them. Their presence alone could change people. Their presence could shut down laughter and stifle the best of parties. Whatever the highly committed religious types were, it was very clear to me that they did not have much of that invisible river about them. They certainly knew a lot about the Bible, and they talked frequently about God, but they did not know much about the great dance and how to live it. I gotta read that sentence again. They certainly knew a lot about the Bible, and they talked frequently about God, but they did not know much about the great dance and how to live in it. The God of my youth was the supreme, all-powerful being with no face and no personality. With weekly regularity, the threshold confirmed this basic vision of God as we all left our personalities at the door and entered to worship Him. The highly committed religious types confirmed the distance of God from ordinary life and all things human, as well as the suspicion that if God was tuned in to life on earth, it was all about rules and regulations and getting it right. So the great riddle for me was how this God could be related to the great dance of life. Like Lewis, I could never connect God and joy, God and beauty, God and life. It made no sense to me, whatever, to talk about enjoying anything and glorifying God. But I knew somehow it had to be so, even though I could not see it. I could not connect the dots. All I could think was, if you throw your life into the God thing, you will end up missing the glory in the dance altogether. The only way I could see it was that the enjoyment of life, the passion and adventure of living, and everything that makes life good were on one side, and this God stuff was on the other. It was an either-or proposition as far as I could tell. Either God or life, either God or joy, either God or dance. To put them together made absolutely no sense to me. They were opposite ends of the pole. Inside of me was a great tension. I was not about to give up on finding the great dance of life. It was too precious, too good, too real. Neither could I give up the idea that it was somehow related to God. It horrified me to think of being a theologian. I was not about to spend my life reading religious insurance manuals, cut off from baseball and laughter and crawfish boils. The only thing worse would be to be a preacher. But I knew that the answer was in God, so I went off to seminary thinking that I would at last sort it all through. I did not go because I was called to preach. I wanted no part of that and still kick against those goads. I went because I had a knot in my gut and was driven to find resolution. And I got some great pieces to the puzzle in seminary, but not the answer. The connection still eluded me. It still seemed to me that if you do the God thing, then you give up on life and the river and the great dance. The next thing I knew, my wife and I were in Scotland, freezing to death, and I was studying theology under Professor James Torrance at King's College in Aberdeen. There was more light in his lectures than I imagined possible. In all his lectures, he kept coming back to the father-son relationship. The heart of the New Testament, he would say, is the relationship between the Father and the Son. Again and again, he would repeat the point and expand it, helping us see that everything flows out of this central relationship. This emphasis was echoed in the powerful writings of Professor T.F. Torrance, James's older brother, which I was studying daily. Connecting the dots. Under the Torrance brothers and the writings of Athanasius and others, my basic notion of God was being converted. It was moving from the abstract to the concrete, from the austere to the personal. And in the midst of that intellectual transition, something very powerful happened to bring the truth about God home to my heart. It happened on August 16, 1987, 1:07 p.m., Sunday afternoon, Aberdeen Maternity Hospital, Aberdeen, Scotland. It was the greatest moment of my life. It was the greatest moment of my life to that point, the birth of our firstborn, a son, James Edward Baxter Kruger. It had been a long, long labor, 30 hours at least, but now Beth and I held our baby boy and we wept together in the joy of it all. I had never experienced anything like it. The nurses finally pried me away and ran me out so Beth could rest. I drove home from Aberdeen to Bankery, the back way through the Scottish hills. I remember noticing that it was an exceptionally beautiful day, not a cloud in the sky, no rain, no darkness, nothing but pure sunshine and almost warmth. I remember going through a roundabout and looking up at the hills and the sunshine, and for a second, I swear the whole earth stopped and rejoiced with me. I swear the mountains sang. It was biblical stuff. The trees clapped their hands in joy. I saw the beauty of it all, the glory and the joy and the great dance of life, as I had never seen it before. I experienced it, tasted it, was baptized in it. And there and then, in that moment, I suddenly realized the problem of my life. All along, I had been thinking about God the wrong way. All along, I had misjudged the very being of God. I had been a blind idiot. God is not some faceless, all-powerful abstraction. God is Father, Son, and Spirit, existing in a passionate and joyous fellowship. I'm going to read that again. God is not some faceless, all-powerful abstraction. God is Father, Son, and Spirit, existing in a passionate and joyous fellowship. The Trinity is not three highly committed religious types sitting around some room in heaven. The Trinity is a circle of shared life, and the life shared is full, not empty, abounding and rich and beautiful, not lonely and sad and boring. The river begins right there in the fellowship of the Trinity. The great dance is all about the abounding life shared by the Father, Son, and Spirit. In an instant, all the dots were connected for me. The logic of the universe fell into place. The logic of creation and of Jesus' coming. The logic of your life and mine, of babies and baseball, of work and fishing, of romance and sex. The logic of woodworking and running a cash and carry store, of laughter and fellowship, of human history, of life. It all came together. And I saw that it all begins with the Trinity and the great dance of life shared by the Father, Son, and Spirit. That is the rhyme and reason and mystery of it all. The vision was so overwhelming that I almost wrecked the car, and I had to pull over on the side of the road. I tried to write it all down, but it was too much. It was too beautiful, too rich. It was too overwhelming, too clear, too simple. But from that moment on, I became a real theologian, a Christian theologian, a Trinitarian theologian, determined to understand and unpack what I had seen and what I knew to be the heart of everything. It all boils down to three things. First, there's the Trinity and the great dance of life and glory and joy shared by the Father, Son, and Spirit. Second, there's the incarnation as the act of the Father, Son, and Spirit, reaching down, extending the circle, their great dance of life to us. Third, there is our humanity, which is the theater in which the great dance is played out through the Spirit. That is what motherhood and fatherhood are all about. That is what fishing and baseball and playing are all about, and laughter and romance, cookouts and work. They are the very ways the beauty of Father, Son, and Spirit, the great dance of the triune God, the glory, the fellowship, the life are played out in us. The logic of God. God is not like that divine abstraction, that faceless, nameless, austere omni-being of the Catechism. He is not an isolated sovereign, a self-centered king who demands that everything revolve around him and be done for his glory. God is not a legalist, a divine bookkeeper who watches us like a hawk to see if we keep his little rules. Nor is he some boring old religious type, a cosmic killjoy who sits in heaven thinking up ways to stifle everything that is good. On the other hand, neither is God like some goofy Santa Claus who doles out goodies without regard to what we are capable of receiving and enjoying. The truth is, God is a circle of passion and life and fellowship. The Trinity is the most beautiful doctrine in the Christian faith, but it has been disastrously neglected and forgotten. And when it is talked about, the discussion is dominated by those philosophical types who get caught up in the technicalities and miss the main and beautiful point of it all. What the doctrine of the Trinity is telling us is that God is fundamentally a relational being. And when we recite the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed and affirm that Jesus Christ is the eternal Son of God, we are saying that there has never been a moment in all eternity when God was alone. We are saying that God has always been Father, Son, and Spirit. We are saying that there was never a time when the Father was not Father, when the Son and the Spirit were not there, and there was just God, so to speak, just some abstract divinity. God has always existed in relationship, fellowship, camaraderie, togetherness, communion, have always been at the center of the very being of God and always will be. It is critical that we see this, and it is just as critical that we see that the shared life of Father, Son, and Spirit is not one of sorrow and loneliness and emptiness. It is not about isolation or self-centeredness. It is all about fellowship. And fellowship means that God is not lonely, sad. God is not a lonely, sad, and depressed being. As Father, Son, and Spirit living in fellowship, God is essentially and eternally very happy. The Father, Son, and Spirit live in conversation, in a fellowship of free-flowing togetherness and sharing and delight, a great dance of shared life that is full and rich and passionate, creative and good and beautiful. The logic of creation. Now, why does this God, this Father, Son, and Spirit create the universe? Why does this Father, Son, and Spirit create human beings? You, me, our children. Why does this Father, Son, and Spirit create the animals and birds and fish and flowers and the millions of beautiful things all around us? Why does this God create work and play and relationships, romance and sex, sports and laughter and food? What is the rhyme and reason behind all these things? When you start with the Trinity, it is the most obvious thing in the world. This Father, Son, and Spirit create to share what they have with us. The goal of the Trinity is inclusion. The purpose of the Father, Son, and Spirit in creation is to draw us within the circle of their shared life so that we too can experience it with them. The early church understood this, and their understanding is reflected in the opening sentence of the Nicene Creed. We believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. The creed does not say we believe in one God, maker of heaven and earth. It says God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. That is very deliberate on the part of the authors. They were placing creation in the context of the fatherhood of God. And that means in the context of the relationship of the Father, Son, and Spirit. In doing so, they were orienting the thought of the church. They were saying that if we want to understand who we are and why we are here, then the way to go about that is to begin not with an abstract divinity, but with the relationship of the Father, Son, and Spirit. It is this relationship that holds the secret to the why of creation, the why of your life and mine, the why of babies and baseball and all things human. The great dance of life, shared by the Father, Son, and Spirit, is the womb of creation. When we start with the Trinity, the purpose of God in creation begins to emerge. The very nature of God's existence as Father, Son, and Spirit is fellowship and shared life. Every thought of this God, every dream and every idea and dream and act is birthed out of this fellowship and bears its stamp. The idea of creation does not arise in a vacuum of divine boredom or loneliness or sadness. The idea of creation flows out of the glorious life shared by the Father, Son, and Spirit. If this God is going to create something, then it is quite natural, so to speak, to do so for the purpose of sharing life. And that is exactly the point. The Father, Son, and Spirit created the human race so that what they have together could be shared with us, so that their great dance of life could be extended to us and played out in our lives. It is no accident that when the Apostle Paul was grappling with the eternal purpose of God for humanity, he chose the word adoption to describe it. The basic idea of adoption is to include. It means that one who is foreign, outside the family circle, is drawn in grace and love within the family circle. And the purpose of that act of adoption is so that the outsider can share in the family's life. The whole mind-boggling act of creation is driven by the desire to share the great dance with us. Given my encounter with the highly committed religious types, I've made a point of not over-instructing my children in religious matters. But there is one thing that I ask them routinely. What does Jesus do with the joy that he shares with his Father and Spirit? I take great delight when our youngest girl, Catherine, answers that question. He puts it in our hearts, she says, so that we can share in it. That is the logic of creation. First, there's the Trinity and the triune life, the fellowship and joy and glory of the Father, Son, and Spirit, the great dance. Second, this God speaks the universe, the earth, and humanity, and all things into existence. And the gracious and astonishing purpose of this creative activity is to extend the dance to us. The Father, Son, and Spirit created us so that we could participate in their life together, so that we could share in their knowledge and laughter and fellowship, in their insights and creativity and music, in their joy and intimacy and goodness, so that all of it could be played out in us and in our ordinary lives. The logic of Christ's coming, the incarnation. If this dream of the Trinity is to extend the dance of life to us, if this dream of the Trinity to extend the life If this dream of the Trinity to extend the dance of life to us is going to come to fruition, two things have to happen. The first is creation itself. For if we do not exist, we cannot share in the Trinitarian life. The second is that the incarnation, for at least one of the Trinity, has to enter into creation and become what we are, so their life can be on our level and reach us. The triune life has to be earthed, so to speak, made human. That is the ultimate driving point of the incarnation. It was to this end that the Son of God became a human being. As Saint Irenaeus put it, our blessed Lord Jesus Christ became what we are in order to bring us to be what he is in himself. I'll read that again. Saint Irenaeus put it this way. Our blessed Lord Jesus Christ became what we are in order to bring us to be what he is in himself. The beloved Son stepped out of eternity into history to be the point of meeting, the point of union, the connection between the Trinity on the one side and humanity on the other. The Son became human to be the place where the life of the Trinity intersects with and flows into human existence. And human existence is taken up into the life of the Trinity now and forever. Jesus came to be the mediator, the one in whom the divine and the human meet and share life. That is what he did in his incarnate life, death, and resurrection. That is what he did in his incarnate life, death, resurrection, and ascension. He forged a connection between the Trinity and us, you and me, and the rest of the human race. He brought about a union between divine and human existence. He opened the great dance and drew us within it. The death of Christ is understood properly within this overarching purpose of the Trinity, to draw us within the circle of their life. If we miss this big picture, then the logic of the death of Christ gets very confused, and a false fear of God descends into the souls of millions. I agree. Let me read that again. If we miss this big picture, then the logic of the death of Christ gets very confused, and a false fear of God descends into the souls of millions. This is what I was and what I'm being healed from. The logic of the incarnation and death of Jesus lies in the determined passion of the Trinity to share their life, their glory, their great dance with us. And not just with us, but with the whole creation. For the dream is for the whole earth to be alive with the glory of God, filled with the great dance of the Father, Son, and Spirit. The logic of babies and baseball and all things human. We live on the other side of the incarnation. The Son of God has already stepped out of eternity into history. He has already become a human being, lived and died, risen again, and ascended to the Father. We look back upon this event. So the great question for us is this: did the purpose of the Trinity find fulfillment in Jesus Christ? Did he accomplish this union, this connection between the divine life and our lives? Did he draw us within the circle of the Trinitarian dance? This question is the watershed question of the new millennium. Did Jesus Christ unite the Trinity with the human race or not? How you answer this question determines everything else to be said. The answer of Jesus himself is his cry from the cross, "It is finished." And the fact that it is finished can only mean that the human race has been given a staggering gift. The finished work of Jesus means that the abounding philanthropy of the triune God has already overtaken us in our human existence. Jesus has already united us with the Trinitarian life of God. And that means that our inclusion in the great dance of life, shared by the Father, Son, and Spirit, is not now a goal to be achieved, a dream for us to attain someday later, when we finally get our religion right. It means that there is far more going on in our lives right now than we ever dreamed. There is, in truth, nothing ordinary about us or our lives at all. Jesus Christ was sent to find us and bring us home, and he did just that. He drew us within the circle. From this point on, we must learn to think about who we are, not what we can be one day. Here, in Jesus Christ, we must rethink everything we thought we knew about ourselves and others, for he has done it. He has given us a place in the great dance. This is not something that we make true. It is the truth. Jesus is the light of the world. He is the secret, the key which unlocks the mystery of babies and baseball, of fishing and barbecues, of romance and love. He is the light which illumines the mysteries of our humanity, from cooking supper and managing a hardware store and painting houses to friendship and laughter and music. It is all the way the dance of the Trinity is being played out in us. When you see the Trinity and the Incarnation for what they are, you are poised to see yourself and your life in a new light, the true light. You are poised to see that there is nothing ordinary about you and your life at all. You and your life are the living expression of the glory and joy and beauty and love, the great dance of the Father, Son, and Spirit. A word on why we just don't get it. Sorting through the whys and the wherefores of how we lost this magnificent vision and ended up where we are today with such a boring and irrelevant Christianity is another matter. It is as complicated as sorting through a family argument, and it involves the whole history of the Western world, the history and development of Christian theology, of philosophy and science, the medieval feudalistic system, the Reformation, the Enlightenment, and any number of major cultural influences and historical events. Most of us don't understand our wives or husbands, let alone the big picture of Western history. But on another level, it is not so complicated. What happened to us, what happened to the church, is that we lost the meaning of Jesus. In the mix and flow of Western history, the Incarnation got eclipsed, and Jesus got smaller and smaller and smaller, to the point that the Jesus that we have on our hands today in the Western world is a cosmic lightweight. He can get us into a vague place called heaven when we die, but he is strangely silent about the meaning of human life here and now. The modern Jesus is strangely silent about the meaning of motherhood and fatherhood, about babies and baseball, cookouts and laughter, about romance and creativity, running a hardware store and being a janitor, about fishing and gardening, music, and the arts. The modern Jesus can get you forgiven of your sins, keep you out of hell, and get you into heaven, but he does not have much to say to you about the mystery of your life today, about your humanity, your loves and passions, and delights and burdens and tears. I had a carpenter working on my house not long ago. He was a Christian, and I asked him if he ever thought about how Jesus Christ relates to his carpentry. He said, "No, not really. I guess Jesus makes me an honest carpenter." The minute he said that, I thought to myself, is that it? Is that all we have to say to the carpenters of the world, the engineers, the designers, the artists? Is that all we have to say to the doctors and nurses and teachers of the world, the cooks and fishermen and janitors? Jesus will make you honest. He can save you and get you into heaven when you die, and in the meantime, he will make you honest. Is honesty the extent of the relationship between Jesus Christ and human beings? Is the influence of Jesus Christ upon human beings and what they do day in and day out with their lives reducible to mere morality? Is that all we have to say? The eclipse of the Incarnation has meant the downsizing of Jesus Christ. It has reduced him to being little more than a spectator who watches the human race from a distance. And the spectator, Jesus, has left human beings thinking of themselves as merely human and thinking of their lives as ordinary. Carpentry is thus solely a human endeavor, just another Christ-less human activity. The place of Jesus Christ and the whole scheme of things is reduced to promoting honesty among the Carpenters' Guild. Sorting through the downsizing of Jesus Christ is where the complication begins. I can tell you that the Calvinist doctrine of double predestination has had an awful lot to do with it, and so has the rise of deism and the mechanistic worldview of Sir Isaac Newton and Descartes' dualisms between the body and the soul, and the mind and reality, and the rise of rationalism and the pride of the Enlightenment. Each in its own way has contributed to the eclipse of the incarnation, the downsizing of Jesus, the reduction of Jesus Christ to being a mere spectator in the universe. But there is another factor which is, to me, the deepest, and that is the change in our understanding of what is fundamental about God. The early church saw that what was fundamental about God was the Trinity. But in the development of Western theology, the holiness of God was substituted for the Trinity as the fundamental truth about God. In truth, it was a false view of the holiness of God that was substituted. For the holiness of God, properly understood, is simply beautiful. If we took the joy and the fullness and the love of the Father, Son, and Spirit, their mutual delight and passion, the sheer togetherness of their relationship, its intimacy, harmony, and wholeness, and rolled them all into one word, it would be holiness. The holiness of God is one of the special words we have to describe the wonder and the beauty, the uniqueness and health and rightness of the Trinitarian life. But in the Western tradition, the holiness of God was detached from the Trinity and reconceived within the world of law and order, crime and punishment, blind and cold justice. Reconceived within this stainless steel world of pure law, holiness came to mean legal perfection or moral rectitude. This notion of holiness was then taken back into the doctrine of God and substituted for the Trinity as the deepest truth about God, the driving force of divine existence. When that happened, the whole logic of the universe changed, and with it, the logic of creation, the logic of the incarnation and the death of Christ, the logic of human existence, and that of the Holy Spirit. It all got twisted, skewed, terribly confused. The gospel in the Western model begins with the statement that God is holy, holy in the legal sense. The human race fell into sin and is liable to punishment. Jesus Christ, against this backdrop, comes to satisfy the holiness and justice of God. On the cross, the guilt of the human race is placed upon Jesus Christ, and God's punishment for sin is poured out upon him. God's justice is satisfied, and we are forgiven, legally clean. In this typical packaging of the Western gospel, several things have gone disastrously wrong. First, the overall picture has been lost. Gone is the great dance of the Trinity and the astonishing vision of the Father, Son, and Spirit reaching out to share their life and glory with us. In its place, we have a divine legalist who is extremely upset over human failure and sin, and we have Jesus coming to rescue us. There's no way to escape the devastating notion implicit here that Jesus comes to rescue us from God. The death of Jesus Christ is now aimed at God rather than at human corruption and alienation. Jesus comes to do something to God, to satisfy his white-gloved legalities, even to change God so that we can be forgiven. Second, the cross has suddenly replaced Jesus himself as the point of eternal significance. And what I was saying before, Jesus is the place where the divine and the human come together. He is the place where they meet and are united. He became human so that he could connect us and thus mediate his divine life to us. Through all eternity, that is the way it will work. We will share in the great dance through Jesus. Forever and ever, he will be the point of meeting, the union between the life of the Trinity and us. Thus, Jesus Christ, not the cross, is and will always be the center of the universe and all things. But now, the point has shifted, such that the cross is all significant. What's critical on the Western model is that Jesus suffered the legal punishment that was to fall upon us. Once the suffering is over, Jesus himself ceases to be of any real and practical value. His work is done. He is no longer needed in the legal arrangement between God and humanity. Having fixed the legal problem between God and human beings, he, in essence, bows out and lets them get on with their business. At best, Jesus remains important as the shining religious example for us to follow, or as the one who shakes the hyssop branch in heaven on occasion to remind God of his sacrifice. This shift from the centrality of Jesus Christ to the centrality of the cross is the great sin of the Western Church and the greatest of all disasters. Third, Justification is overemphasized to the point of replacing adoption as the heart of the Christian message. The gospel here is all about being forgiven. It is true, of course, that forgiveness is part of the message. Thank God, for we are all in need of forgiveness. But it is not the whole truth. It is not even the main part of the story. Forgiveness serves a higher goal, and that higher goal is our inclusion in the life of the Trinity. That is what God is after in sending Jesus. But on the Western model, the higher goal is virtually forgotten. Justification has so dominated the landscape of Christian thought that adoption has been marginalized. We don't hear much about our adoption at all. We hear a lot about forgiveness, but very little about the staggering reality of our inclusion in Jesus' relationship with his Father in the Spirit. Fourth, the overemphasis upon justification and the virtual silence on our adoption leave us in the dark about our true identity and the very secret of our existence. Jesus, according to the Western model, came to fix the legal problem. The focus is upon his suffering on the cross. When people speak of Christ as the mediator, they mean that he stands between an angry God and sinful people and straightens out the legal mess. Gone is the vision that he is the point of union between divine and human life. Gone is the vision that he is the connection between the Trinity and human existence, and that he mediates the triune life of God to us. On the Western model, once the sin thing is fixed, Jesus goes back to heaven and becomes a spectator, watching us from a distance. The union, the connection that Jesus forged between the Trinity and human beings is eclipsed. And the eclipse of that connection between us and the triune life leaves us with no choice but to see ourselves as merely human. By default, by what is never seen and never said, we are left to assume that our human existence is just human, secular. There is no Trinity in it, no divine life, no divine dance. It is just human. Our lives and the totality of our human existence fall under the heading of ordinary. Our motherhood and fatherhood, our love and affection, our work, our carpentry, our play and gardening, our baseball and cookouts and laughter, our friendships and joys, our creativity and romance are left outside the Trinitarian life of God. They are merely human. We never even suspect the truth. The long and short of it is that we are left clueless about the staggering reality that has overtaken human existence in Jesus Christ. A great veil covers our eyes and we cannot see. We have no idea who we are. In the dark about our true identity, and thus the meaning of our human existence, we have been thrown into a desperate search to find a new one. And that is where we are today, 20 centuries into the Christian era. A profound identity crisis has swelled within our corporate soul, and it is driving us crazy. We are, as Chaucer once described it, like a drunk man who knows he has a house, but cannot find his way home. The irony of all ironies is that the Western world is crying out for spiritual meaning, and the church has none to give it. Its Jesus is too small. The truth is, this world belongs to the Holy Trinity and is permeated by the great dance of life, shared by the Father, Son, and Spirit. You and your life have been overtaken by the abounding philanthropy of the triune God. You have been included in the great dance. That is your identity, who you are and what your life is all about. That is what your motherhood and fatherhood are all about. That is what your gardening and your cookouts and your carpentry and work and love and friendships are all about. They are the ways the great dance of the Trinity is being played out in you. I'm reading the books that have been most helpful to me in my personal, spiritual, and theological journey so that their messages can be spread far and wide to help others. If you are enjoying and being blessed by the works of these amazing authors, please consider, if you are able, purchasing a copy of your own and giving it to someone else to read so that the blessing of Jesus and his grace is spread even further through your gift and partnership in God's work. Thank you.